The 1960s is the bloodiest decade in American history since the Civil War, since the 1860s. Servicemen killed weekly, reported in the weekly papers. Campus unrest, civil rights movement playing out in the weekly news. That's the 1960s. The bloodiest year in that bloodiest decade? 1968. The Tet Offensive in February of that year. Martin Luther King assassinated, RFK assassinated. Yet, somehow we managed to still dream about tomorrow. It was still in us. It still mattered. It's what birthed the Star Trek television series. By my measure, one of the greatest television shows ever, The Twilight Zone, was heavily influenced by space themes. Every third episode, there's some space concept being delivered to you, telling another story through the lens of a space story. Our presence in space is affecting not only the engineers and the mathematicians and the scientists, it's affecting the creative dimension of that which we call culture. We are living it at every turn. Hardly what I call a special interest. What happens in December 1968? How do you cap off that year? Apollo 8. An underappreciated Apollo mission, not by this audience, but by anybody else. Most people never heard of it. Apollo 8, what's that? Excuse me, that was the first time anybody ever left Earth with a destination in mind. Yeah, it figurated around the moon. Photo of Earth rising over the lunar landscape. The photo is really misnamed because the moon is tidally locked to Earth. So Earth is always in the sky on the near side of the moon, always. So it only was rising because, in fact, they were figure eighting around the moon and Earth rose up. That photo, we all know it. Earthrise over the moon. There was Earth, seen not as the map maker would have you identify it. No, the countries were not color-coded with boundaries. It was seen as nature intended it to be viewed. Oceans, land, clouds. We went to the moon and we discovered Earth. I claim we discovered Earth for the first time. How does that affect culture? I got a list. You could take apart this list and come up with an explanation that does not directly reference space for everything on this list. You could probably do that. But I take a step back and I look at that list and I say, wait a minute. Wait a minute, how is it? Let's back up to 1962 briefly. Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring. The Green Movement typically credits that as the birth of ecology, the birth of caring about the environment. It was a best-selling book. I have a different view. Maybe it planted some seeds, maybe it tilled the landscape, but stuff didn't really start happening until after that photo of Earthrise over the moon was published. 1968, the whole Earth catalog is published. There's a version before that photo is printed. The instant that photo comes out, that is the identifying cover picture of the whole Earth catalog. Thinking about Earth as a whole. Not as a place where nations war, as a whole. 7 months later, 1969, we land on the moon. 1970, we're still going to the moon. We go until 1972, so watch this sequence of events. 1970, the Comprehensive Clean Air Act is passed. There were 2 other versions of that in the 60s, 1963 and 67, but the most important rendering of that act came in 1970. Earth Day was birthed March 1970. The Environmental Protection Agency was founded in 1970. There was a film called The Hellstrom Chronicle. It was one of the first pseudo-documentaries to actually get first run in the theaters. It was all about insects, it was a scare movie about insects and what role they might play on our food supply as we go forward. But it got us thinking about nature. The organization Doctors Without Borders was founded in 1971. Where do you even get that phrase from? No one thought of that phrase before that photo was published. Because every globe in your classroom has countries painted on it. Doctors Without Borders, 1971. DDT gets banned, not right after Rachel Carson's book, gets banned in 1972. We're still going to the moon. We're still looking back to Earth. Clean Water Act, 1971, 1972. Endangered Species Act. 2 versions of that in the 1960s. The most comprehensive version, 1973. The catalytic converter gets put in 1973. Unleaded gas, 1973. We're still at war in Vietnam. There's still campus unrest. Yet we found the time to start thinking about Earth. That is space operating on our culture, and you cannot even put a price on that. That is a nation, that is a world reacting to a new perspective on what it is to be alive on this planet that we all share. And out of that era, an entire generation of people, they think, they feel, they intellectualize about space. We see it in the art. We see it in Hollywood. We see it in television productions. Storytellers. That's because the space frontier was crossed weekly. You know, back then, you didn't need special programs to convince people that science was a good thing in school. You didn't need special programs to show people that engineering and math, the STEM fields, that these are useful to society, to our identity as a nation. Because the headlines that were writ large over that era had built into them the fact that innovation created those headlines. Innovation brought to you by an ambitious community of scientists, technologists, engineers, and mathematicians.